And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a principal solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to track what recipes and their versions have been applied to your Drupal site? There's a module for that. It's called Recipe Tracker, and it was created in March of 2025 by Centauro as part of the Commerce Recipe Core, notionally the very first Drupal site site template. It has a 1.0.0 version available and is notionally actively maintained, although the project repo only has a single commit. It has never had an issue open against it, which is pretty good considering it is in use according to 207 sites according to Drupal.org. Now, after installing the recipe tracker module, every time a recipe is applied, the name and version of the recipe will be added to a new recipe log, along with the full package name of the recipe and the user who applied it, as well as the date and time it was applied. The module uses an event subscriber to generate a recipe log entity, so there should also be lots of API options if you want to extend how the logging works, for example, using Drupal's Entity API. This module was nominated by our own John Picozzi. So, John, why don't you kick off the discussion by telling us what inspired you to nominate Recipe Tracker?
I have no idea because I don't remember nominating it. Maybe because I thought it was cool, the idea of tracking recipes. I don't know. I'd have to look back as to why I recommended it, but I mean, ultimately, knowing which recipes you've applied feels like a pretty valuable thing to me, especially when you're working on a site and you kind of get long into working on that site, you might not remember what recipes you applied originally or back in the day. So, yeah, that's probably where I was coming from if I have to think back to it.
I could also see for somebody who is taking over maintainership of a particular site, being able to sort of look back at the history and knowing what recipes a site was built on could also be pretty useful information in terms of understanding, what the path forward might need to look like.
I think it's also good for an audit trail too, but the problem is that most recipes are going to be applied locally, right? And this is going to be a database entry, which you're not going to push up. So unless you hook into it and send that event subscriber thing to somewhere else, it doesn't really, it's not going to persist anywhere that makes sense. So I wonder, even for the projects where we apply recipes over and over again, like the one that we do for CSP headers to keep things in sync, we're applying those locally and exporting the configuration. So I think this is interesting, but for a different reason. And that's because there's a very old issue in the Drupal core issue queue asking for notes and tracking when modules are installed and just uninstalled. Um, the framing around that actually was, I thought, a real scenario, but also made me chuckle because somebody said, I have a really big site with thousands of modules and I don't know why I installed all of them. So I'd like to have a note to remind myself. And
Yeah.
my first thought was like, well, you should have that documented somewhere. Because again, if you do this, it's not going to happen on production. It's going to happen locally, ideally in Drupal 8 plus.
Do people
But
document? Is that something we're supposed to do?
Mm.
Oh,
yeah, fair enough. That's an ongoing problem.
I
I
don't
mean, it
know
would be
whatever
documented
you mean.
in version control, right? Like, if you're adding a module, wouldn't you be able to see in the git commit history?
Well, yeah, and I mean, also you would be able to see the fact that, well, I don't know if that module tended changed config, you'd be able to see config come along with that, or you enabling that
Mhm.
module. So, I mean, that only kind of works if you enable the module. So if you install it and don't enable it, then, um, but I mean, I think the other aspect here too is that, which version of a recipe is installed or applied, I guess I should say.
Applied.
Right? Like I feel like that's super useful, especially if you have again, like you've been working on a site for a while, you applied a bunch of recipes, and now you have a new version of that recipe that you may want to consider applying. Like, I think it's good to be able to compare those things
Yeah.
and have that historical track of what you've done.
Well, thank you, Martin. As always, you found an interesting module of the week to talk about, and I think last parting thought is you said there's only one commit, but this is one of those modules that I feel like it kind of does what it needs to do, and I can't see it really ever needing any additional updates other than maybe an easier way to like send the message somewhere that it makes sense to store it, other than the local database, which isn't going to get onto production. But yeah, I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could maybe provide like a configuration option to like write a text file or something. To your point,
Yeah.
is something that could be committed to Git
Yep.
to have sort of something that would live where other people could see it. But yeah, I think you're probably right. It's by design fairly contained in terms of what it tries to do. So that's probably why it hasn't needed a lot of ongoing code changes.
Nick's also assuming that people aren't running DB log on their production site, which, you know,
No, I mean more people aren't applying recipes directly on their production site, but I guess with Drupal CMS, that's less of a concern. So
Yeah.
or less of a reality. So maybe this
oh,
does
I
make
see.
sense.
I see what you're
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
saying
true.
now.
yeah, you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
so Martin, if listeners wanted to suggest a module of the week, what's the best way for them to do that?
We are always happy to have lively discussions about interesting projects in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as Manclue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Thanks, Martin. See you next week.
See you then.